my God, it's a giant. Bro, there's just no way that just happened right now. Hey guys, what's going on? Got a CutCarryCast podcast, episode 3. Super excited today. Got a special guest, Austin Wilson, or better known as Fisherman Wilson, and we're gonna get some river reports from him for the American and anywhere else he's been lately. I'm excited to kind of touch base with him. I think if you guys have been following him for a while on his channel, you'll know he was pretty into bass fishing most of his life, and he's kind of made a little bit of a transition to being on the river a little bit more lately. I think it's something he's always done, but he's going to kind of fill us in on what he's been up to and what he kind of has planned lately, which I think you guys will be pretty excited to hear what he has to say. So we got him on the line here. We're going to give him a little round of applause to Mr. Austin Wilson for coming on. What's going on, man?
What's up, man? How's it going?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. I know a lot of people are going to be excited to hear kind of what you've been up to lately. What's happening with Wilson, man?
I know. I've completely stopped with the YouTube thing. It's been really busy. You got the guide business and little man. He's roughly 14 months old, so he's been taking up a lot of my time. And I'm sure everyone out there that has kids knows what I'm talking about. It's just one of those things where you just don't have much free time, and when I do have free time and I go out, I'm not gonna lie, it feels kind of guilty for going out and not spending time with little man. So, yeah. But when he gets older, he's already been out fishing with me a couple times, so he just has a hard time walking around, so I just put him on my back and I go fishing.
I mean, pretty sure pretty soon he's gonna be just like his dad, right? Just getting out there and snatching fish up left and right.
I sure hope so. Fingers are crossed. You never know what kind of path they'll take. Hopefully, they take the right one. I'll be as good as dad as I could be, and I know my wife will be a good mom. So hopefully it'll turn out good. I'm gonna raise them right. That's for sure.
No, that's awesome. I think, that's just part of life, right? You're kind of starting that next chapter of what's going to be going on for you. And I think that's an important thing because as much as we like to fish, there's a lot of other things in life that are important, and we like to appreciate and things like that. But yeah, so something I wanted to touch on first while we got you here is kind of wanted to talk to you about kind of just like what's been going on. I know you're big in the bass fishing tournament scene. Stuff started to change. Maybe you don't have a bass boat anymore. Maybe you have some other stuff. Just kind of walk everybody through what's been going on with you the last year or so.
Yeah, the last year or so, I probably actually sold my boat roughly 2 years ago. I love to bass fish. Still love it. I just don't really have the time to do it. Plus with this golden mussel thing going around and lakes closing and tournaments getting canceled and call it boat COVID, I guess. You just can't, take your boat anywhere. Or that boat has to be, like Folsom. If you're going to fish Folsom, your boat has to stay at Folsom or Berryessa. Or now I heard Oroville's going to this, so, there's a bunch of lakes. And, that's part of the reason. And then, there's a lot of things that's kind of made me salty over the years. I'm not going to lie, since I was, probably in my early 20s, and just slowly kind of built up. And, it's kind of like I'm kind of over it. I still love to compete. We got Stag Proof coming up in the beginning of August, end of July. So I will definitely be there for that. I've done pretty well in that tournament. And you get to throw a frog for 2 days. And, it's great. Just using your eyes, not looking at the graph, not staring at live scope or whatnot. So, which I'm not against live scope. I know it helps catch fish and helps you understand what fish are doing. But, personally, I've never had the finances for luxury. I've never had a really expensive boat. I've never had high electronics. I've just kind of been, I've been told by a couple of people I'm the John Cox of California. For the West Coast, because I just like to fish shallow.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that's something that, I myself, and I'm sure a lot of other people have found just intriguing about watching you fish and following you on YouTube and down the tournament trail is you've kind of in my opinion, made up for a lot of maybe your slack in the sense of your opportunities, whether it be a boat and equipment and different things like that. You've really made up for it with just your pure ability to fish and using your senses. And I think that's probably your greatest attribute, because I think it's no surprise. I mean, whether we're fishing for salmon or striper or shad or bass, I mean, you seem to know how to catch them. I don't know if it really matters what boat you have or what electronics you have,
Yeah, it really doesn't matter, just as long as I can get from point A to point B, but it's, now, like, with how tournaments are going and fish that are being, off the bank, majority of them are going to be off the bank, certain times a year. And if you don't have it, you're missing out. It's going to be hard to compete, especially like, I mean, there's all these spotted bass lakes, all these, spotted bass just love to suspend, and so without having live scope, it's almost impossible to win, and even some of our other lakes, like Trinity, for instance, those fish are eating kokanee and rainbows. The majority is kokanee. Those fish will suspend over 100 foot of water, and they're sitting in like 20 foot, over a point or a hump or whatever, or just in the middle of nowhere, Some of our other lakes are a little bit different, Clear Lake, the Delta, Orville After Bay. Orville After Bay fishes kind of like Clear Lake, kind of like the Delta, where you have a lot of grass, and those fish, can be out to eat, but they can be, long can be shallow too, because you have that grass. So, but yeah, no, I mean, how it's been, I just kind of, like I said, had the kid roughly, 14 months ago. And so that's kind of the main reason I kind of got out of it, so.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And like you said, I mean, this sport's always changing. Things are always becoming different. Like you said, whether it's live scope, just the actual tournament scene. I mean, we've seen a lot of stuff, I guess is the way to put it, happen to a lot of the major bass fishing trails in the state of California and on the West Coast in general. I think our opportunities are becoming very limited as bass fishermen to actually succeed. And for you, I mean, I'm not going to speak for you, but it appeared to me at least that you wanted to fish at the highest level you could with with the opportunities you were given, and a lot of those opportunities are kind of dwindling on the West Coast.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I believe you still have the federation, the Bass Federation and MLF, or it was when I fished FLW Federation, which can qualify you to fish. I don't even know what it is anymore with the MLF, but Bassmaster Classic, or whatever the MLF is now. What I fished, it was the Forestwood Cup, so which I back in 2018 was able to qualify for the Forestwood Cup, so which was pretty awesome experience. Going back east and fishing against top guys, and then fishing in 2019. For a full season back there. So was very fortunate to win a couple tournaments that qualified me to go back east and fish at the highest level.
Yeah, so, I mean, that's living the dream, right?
Yep, living the dream. The unfortunate thing is, it's very expensive. I mean, obviously now it's probably more expensive, but just for entry fees alone was $40,000. So it was just like you got to come up with that money, and then plus travel expenses, and obviously, food, where you going to stay, which I stayed in my truck for quite a bit. There's only a few times I got a hotel, and because the weather was so bad that there was no way I'm sleeping in my truck or my underneath my boat cover, So, but and then obviously I got to meet some friends back there, and had houses, and I was able to bum a shower every once in a while, but it was, like you said, it was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, regardless of how everything worked out, I mean, you got to do that, and that was something I talked about with Quinn on the last podcast. Was just with all his college stuff. Although he wasn't like the most successful angler, and make it all the way to Bassmaster or something. I mean, he still got to go around the country and see all those bodies of water, meet all those people, and he gained a lot of life experience as a result of that. So, what I was going to ask you is, I know now that we're kind of segueing away from some of the bass fishing stuff, I think a lot of people don't realize, or maybe they do, how much time you actually have been spending on the river lately and how you've been kind of shifting gears towards that. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I've been fishing for salmon, steelhead, stripers, just as long as I've been bass fishing. I just kind of took that bass side of things a little more serious, because there's a little bit of money in it, and now I've just been guiding on the river, either the American, the Feather, or the guys up in Reading, and those guys call it the lower sack, but guys, I feel like myself and some other guys, we call it the upper sack because, Reading, that's pretty far from where we're at, and so that's just the upper part of the sack. But a lot of guys call the upper part of the sack above Shasta. But, they call it the lower Sacramento. I fish up there quite a bit. The fishing is pretty good. Definitely a special place up there by Sundial and fishing for all those pretty big rainbows. But yeah, I've been fishing the American as my backyard, my entire life. I know that place like the back of my hand. I've been guiding on it for the last 2 years, doing, shad, stripers, steelhead, and we have salmon this year, and I am super stoked to have salmon back and we're able to fish for them. So it's probably one of my favorite fish to catch. I'm not a big fish eater. I just like to catch and release. But, obviously if I have clients that want to keep fish, I will totally clean fish and process them for my customers.
Yeah, so for the people that maybe don't know kind of the intricacies of like what's happened with salmon the last couple of years and kind of like what they can expect this year, maybe just walk us through what it means that it's finally open and kind of what's been happening historically. Because I know for at least myself, in the whole salmon thing, I'm kind of new to that.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we've had a decline in salmon, and we've had some really bad drought years. Which, when those fish return in the, I guess, late summer, fall, the water's been really warm. It's killed a lot of the fish, especially in 2000. When was that? 20, 21, 22, roughly. So, like 3 years ago from today, we had really bad drought, and the water was super low, got super warm, and there was a lot of fish dying. And the reason why they closed it wasn't just because of, this one drought. It just kind of, there was a bunch of, years that kind of, we had not great water, because they actually closed it back in 2008 for a couple of years. And, the numbers kind of bounced back a little bit. And then obviously we had a couple really bad years with drought, and they kind of like knocked them back. And the hatcheries weren't getting the fish that they needed to, reproduce, these fish. And so since, we have these hatcheries because we have all these dams. We have Shasta Dam, we have, Folsom Dam, Orville, and those kind of block those salmon from spawning in their natural habitat. So we built these, hatcheries. Obviously I know the Folsom Natoma Dam was built in the 50s, roughly. So they built these hatcheries to kind of take over the loss of habitat. And ever since then, they've kind of, there's pretty much no wild fish. They might spawn naturally, but were those offspring, or were those fish that spawn, were they from the hatchery? You know what I'm saying? Where they just didn't make it to the hatchery, just spawned in the river instead. And so that the offspring that was able to, hatch from the gravel and make it down to the ocean, when that fish came back, is that fish wild? Or is it, it still has the genetics of being, raised in a hatchery for a little bit, right? So do we really have any wild fish anymore in, I guess, the Central Valley? That's a pretty good question. I don't think there is, to be totally honest. But these hatcheries are kind of, they have a certain quota. And the thing is, when they only take, throwing an estimate out there, I'm not too sure exactly the number that they get, but say, they take 4 million fish, 4 million eggs, the only, let's say one salmon, one hen, one hen delivers roughly 2,000 plus eggs, and only out of that 2,000, only 1, maybe 2% of those eggs will survive to be able to return. So they dump 4 million eggs, and only 1% comes back. What's that number? You're gonna do it off your top of your head, roughly.
Yeah,
I think
just a couple thousand fish, right? I mean,
right. I think roughly they have like 40,000 fish returning. And that's been a really good year. 50, maybe. I mean, 50's crazy, but roughly 40,000 fish was on the American just for one river. Um, and we used to have the American probably used to get up, in the millions of fish returning. So if you think this number has been crazy low for a long time, and because we've taken so much habitat, and I guess water's been obviously fish like water, right? When we don't have water, fish don't survive, and so kind of wish that the hatcheries would kind of step up, maybe you build these hatcheries a little bit bigger, produce some more fish, but then if the biologists come and say, hey, no, we can't put that many fish back in the river, back in the ocean because it overthrows the ecosystem, right? Because they haven't had that many fish in the ocean or in the rivers for a long period of time. So it's like there's a balance, right? I mean, I wish I had the answer. I'm just a fisherman. I'm not a biologist, but I'm on the water a lot, and I kind of see what's going on. A lot of us are on the water a lot. We kind of understand, like, and sea lions. There's a lot of sea lions, eating the bass, going around during spawn time, swimming through the tulies, eating bass. And same thing with the salmon. They're coming up, hanging out in downtown Sacramento on the docks, just mowing down salmon. And they're only eating portions of them. They're not eating the whole fish. They're just, getting the eggs or just, ripping out their bellies. And, some of them are eating the whole fish, but not all of them. But, we used to have roughly, I think it was like 90,000 sea lions left along Oregon, Washington, and California. And now I think there's over 400,000 of them. So when they were put on there's only when they got put on the protected species list. So I feel like they should
have quadruple.
Yeah. I kind of wish they would, relieve that, that listing, and be able to take out a couple. But, we live in California, and California likes to protect everything.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we see a little sea lion restaurant in Wilson's future.
Maybe,
right? Something I wanted to add that I heard. I'm curious to see what you kind of think about it. Is obviously all these fish are getting taken from the hatchery. My girlfriend actually used to work there, and she dealt with some of that stuff, so I got to see how it worked. And something that I heard, and I'm curious to see what you think, is I heard that a lot of those fish carcasses get taken and get turned into fertilizer or get sold to different people, and they're not actually returned to the river like maybe they would be in a more like natural organic way, as far as them like decomposing in the river. All those nutrients go back into the river for the smelt and all the other different types of fish. A lot of that stuff's just getting loaded off and turned into dog food or whatever they're doing with it, and it's not actually going back into the river. I don't know if you've heard anything like that before.
Yeah, definitely. No, there was a video that went out, and I can't remember what's the video's name. It was on YouTube. James Stone is the one that, I don't know if he produced it or helped produce it or whatnot, but I know he was a part of it. And if you don't know who James Stone is, he's part of the NorCal Guides and Sportsmen's Association. And he's helping us fight, to keep our salmon, keep us fishing for, our salmon. And they pretty much, what was happening was, after they spawn these fish, they would take these fish and either, sell them to Oregon, Washington, or give them to food banks. Or, I mean, I'm assuming, but, I'm not assuming about that. I knew about that, but I don't know about the dog food. I'm assuming that they probably made dog food out of it too. But after that video was released, they kind of like held back, and what, like the Sacramento's doing, the Feather's doing, I haven't heard about on the American yet, but they were taking all the carcasses from, the Sacramento and the Feather, and they were putting them back in the river to help, that, I guess, the nutrients going back in the ocean or right back in the rivers, because when the salmon die, right, their offspring get laid in the eggs, or the offspring get laid in the rocks, and then when they emerge, you got, some salmon carcasses and all their, they're kind of breaking down, and they're eating not just, their, I guess, the stuff that's, breaking down, floating in the river, but they're also eating bugs and all that kind of good stuff. But the nutrients that those, the parents, are, I guess, when they're decomposing into the river, that's a huge food source for everything, fish, crawdads, birds, and then obviously their offspring. But yes, that was a huge deal going on. I know that they were talking about it on the American. I think it was going on the Feather too. Not 100% about that, but I know it was going on the American. And then on top of that too is like when they got their quota, they kept bringing those fish in and killing them. They weren't shoving them back out in the river and letting them spawn naturally. But what I understand now, they are, as soon as they get their quota, those gates go down and they pretty much shove all those fish back out in the river and let them do their thing. So, but yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know that. I wish I knew that YouTube video that was going on. I mean, this happened a couple years ago, but yeah, that's 100% true. That was going on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if we find it later, we'll link it in the description just in case any of you guys want to check it out. You can see what he's talking about. But I think the unfortunate reality and what you kind of were talking about earlier is that at the end of the day, any time that mankind really gets so involved in some of these natural processes that have been going on for hundreds of years, I mean, there's just really no way that we can really foresee the impact we're going to have. And to your point that you made earlier, they don't want to let out too many fish because they don't know what's going to happen in the ocean. And it's really funny to take that 10,000 foot view and really look at what we're talking about. We're talking about we've altered this so severely to the point now where we're like, we don't even know if we can bring back what once was because we've messed it up so bad that we're not sure exactly what's going to happen if we send all these fish back out into the ocean.
Right. And they are experimenting with things. So, like, I heard recently that, from that same guy I'm talking to, James Stone, he does, like, Facebook Lives, and he has his own YouTube channel of that NorCal Guides and Sportsmen Association, of him talking about, all this stuff that's going around. He is super knowledgeable. If you want to listen to a guy that knows what he's talking about, I feel like he's a really good listen. But what I was getting back to, what they're trying to do, what they've experimenting with is, we used to be able to fish for springers, and that's a spring salmon. So we have 3 runs of salmon. We have a spring run, a fall run, and a winter run of fish. So technically, it doesn't matter what time of year, we should have salmon in the river. It doesn't matter. Every month there should be fish and, a salmon in the river. And what they're doing with these springers is, what I understand, there's two rivers that they're doing, 2 rivers that they're doing this with. So when these springers come up to the hatchery, they are shipping them. They're taking them in trucks and they're bringing them above the lake and releasing them back up in the river above the lake. And then they'll go up in the rivers and spawn naturally. And when those offspring come back, I guess they have these traps or whatnot, and they're catching these offspring, and then they'll bring them back down into the main river and let them go and work their way down out into the ocean. So like to see what that, how that plays out, in the next few years. I know I think it's a new experiment what they're doing. Because like I said, those fish used to go way up there, way up in the Sierras and spawn. And obviously we've taken that away from them. Another thing that's kind of bothered me the last couple of years is, I'm all about, having places for these fish to spawn, with gravel bars and whatnot. But no joke about they have dumped millions of dollars in projects on the American River, adding gravel, and like I said, I'm about, adding projects and trying to, make these fish have areas to spawn, because there's a lot of like I said, we've taken away a lot of the habitat above the dams. So they're trying to add these gravel bars for these fish to spawn. And what that's doing is, we have those low water years, is making the river very shallow. And what happens to a very shallow river? It warms up very fast, and that also will create algae on the rocks. And, obviously some of the algae will take oxygen out of the river too. So that's one thing I'm not a fan of. I kind of wish they would dredge out some of these holes, because from coming up from Discovery Park and going to the basin, at Nimbus Basin, there is not very many deep holes for those fish to hold in. they pretty much hit this American, and they have to jam as far as they can to get into deep water up at the basin. There's, like I said, a couple deep holes, not very many. And what I mean by deep, I mean like 28-foot deep. I know there's one hole down in the lower American that's like 32, but that's on the very bottom. There's nothing up top that's very deep. Most of that river is, I would say, like 5 to 10 foot, 5 to 12 foot, and 12 foot's deep. So, and it just sucks because that's, like I said, those fish hit the river, and they're like, we have no holding water, and they go, so we do have, they do hold up in certain areas, but they don't hold there very long before they're, moving through. So, like I said, I'm all about the gravel projects. I want them to spawn naturally, but once you're adding all these gravel, it does, when we get high water, a lot of these gravel bars get moved around and they fill in the deep holes below them, and I just don't know. I mean, obviously these guys make more money than I do. They're biologists. They've studied this. So I'm just a fisherman, and I can just, I'm out there. I kind of understand how these fish work too,
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be cool, especially like you're saying, although these people have studied this stuff in a academic setting and obviously they've had experience in the field, I think there really is no replacement for some of the outdoorsmen that, like yourself, that are spending day after day after day after day out on the river, especially over, like you said, your entire life, 20, 30 years or however long you've actually been fishing. I think that you look at the state of Texas, you look at some of these other places that have a lot more investment in their fisheries as a whole. I think it'd be nice if there would be a little bit of a parallel that could be drawn between the fishermen and the biologists and kind of filled those voids that you guys are both having, because there's probably a lot of experiences and information that you're gathering, data, so to speak, that they could benefit from knowing. And then there's, on the flip side, there's probably a lot of stuff that they know that you don't, that might help you understand some of their decisions. So that would be cool if there'd be some way for us to kind of connect those two things together.
Of course. Yeah, that would be great, because, I don't want to, I'm not trying to talk, shit about what they're doing, because it's like they've definitely done, they've had a lot more research, and they've all, this is what they do for a living. So, but just knowing just the basics of, salmon and what they need, I feel like it's pretty simple at the same time. Like I said, look at Texas. They're taking like OHIV. It's a perfect example of what they've been doing there. They've been taking some of their biggest fish that people catch, and they bring them to, a facility where they breed them, and make giant bass. So I wish our, something like that would happen here, because we used to have, 50 pounders, get caught every year, and now you catch one that's 25 pounds, and you're like, oh man, that's a big one, or you catch one that's a 30, and like, man, I haven't caught a 30 in a couple years, like I kind of wish that they would have something like that, to where they would take some of these bigger fish and kind of, try to get some bigger fish in the river, so, and there's a couple rivers in California that have some absolute giants in them. One river is, well, there's actually one in Oregon as well, but the Smith is, one river that has just freaks, it has giants. The other one in Oregon is the Chetco. The Chetco and they were very close to each other. Like if you look at them on the map, they're, they're very close. So these two rivers that they just, I don't know, something about them, and I don't know if it's the genetics or what, they're just built different there. Just like our bass fishing, some of our lakes just have bigger bass, Clear Lake, for instance, we know the hitch is a huge food source for the bass, and they get really big. And there's a lot of, 4 to 5 pounders in that lake. It's unbelievable. Trinity is another place that has a lot of big ones, and that food source is kokanee and rainbows. You have big smallmouth and big largemouth, and they're a northern strain. The northern strain, we both know, and some of you guys listening know, that the northern strain don't get as big as the Florida strain. So you catch a 7-pound northern strain, that's a big one. That's a really big one for the northern strain,
100%.
So,
well, I think that's a lot of good information on the salmon, which obviously is going to be a focus of your guide service when those opportunities happen this year. What do you have to say about some of the other fish that you guys have been catching? I know you've been getting some other fish out there as well.
Yeah, definitely shad. That's another fish that I've been fishing for lately. I've been doing half day trips, in the evenings, or if you guys want to go in the morning too. I've been doing trips in the morning. So I'll do one in the morning, one in the evening. If I have two different trips, but obviously we're supposed to. I don't know if it's all the weather this weekend, but it's supposed to get 103. So I definitely enjoy the morning deal where it's a little bit cooler out, and then we're off the water, by noon or so before it gets too hot. And I'd only charge, for half day trips, 150 a person, for half day trips. And then, for a full day, I charge 250. And I fish all day, pretty much dark to dark. I try to get your guys' money worth. And, if we catch a limit, then, we'll call it. But, if we're having fun, either just catch and release, I will go all day long, and I pretty much, I have all the equipment. I have a barbecue, so if you guys want to bring, food, you want to bring broths. Broths are probably the easiest thing. You just throw them on the barbecue and, bring some buns and some, mustard and ketchup, and you're good to go. But yeah, no, so it's a good time. So like shad is probably my favorite because you can get a lot of fish, and they come up in the rivers by the thousands. Um, and it's great because you'd be like floating through, and all of a sudden the bottom is just like moving. It's just alive, and it's it's pretty fun, when you're catching them every other cast. And then, I also, when it kind of gets kind of like slow, like, all right, I'm done catching these shad. I try to catch a small one. I'll put a big old hook in it and I'll let it swim around, behind the boat and try to catch one of the giant stripers that live on the American. And there's just giants that live there. Like every year I'll see them. You'll float through a section and be like, oh, there's one like 50 pounds. Like they're just freaks. Or they'll be in a school of them, and the smallest one in the school is like 25 pounds. There's some giants in that river. So, and the only way to really catch them is on live bait, big live bait, and that's what that perfect bait source is that their perfect bait is the shad. And they get pretty big. They get anywhere from like pound to about 5 pounds. 5 pounds is on a big side. But yeah, we use light line 4-6 pound tests when we're fishing for the shad, and they jump and they pull pretty hard. Pound for pound, they're probably one of the hardest fighting fish.
That sounds like a good time to me. What
Yeah.
would you say that, depending on what people want from your trips, is there kind of an opportunity to maybe catch a couple different species a day, or just focus on one or the other, or how do you guys usually like to go about it?
Yeah, I definitely offer, if you guys want to catch different species throughout the day, I definitely offer that. Or if you just want to focus on a certain species, like, want to just go out and catch stripers, we'll just go out and focus on stripers. But I will definitely offer, trips that, including shad, stripers, and steelhead in the same day. This time of year, the steelhead don't get very big. You catch one in that 5 pound class range, and that's going to be a really good one. But a lot of fish are like that 2 to 3 pounds, which are fun fighting fish. They're fun. They get airborne. They fight pretty hard. But yeah, so I'll do all three in the same day. So, and then as soon as salmon opens, July 16th is salmon opener. I'll probably be more focused on that. But steelhead live in the river pretty much year round. Stripers pretty much live in the river year round. I kind of like stop fishing for them right around like October though, because that's really when the salmon are, at least on the Americans, really when they start showing up.
Gotcha. And
So
what would you say as far as a striper go? I know we talked about kind of the salmon on a little bit of a decline, and it sounds like the shad are just kind of crazy. Do you think the Americans still pushing out kind of those special fish as far as stripers go?
honestly, everything I feel like is in the decline. When I was a kid, in the late '90s, the shad used to be just unbelievable. And I mean, there's still a lot of shad, but I just feel like they're not as thick as they used to be. Like I still see big schools, but it's not where you can go and catch close to 100 in the evening. We're still catching 20, 30, up to 40 fish, when it's really good. But it used to be just every single cast. It didn't matter, where you casted. As long as you were in the area, you could short cast, long cast. You could, get a backlash or not backlash, but you could have a wind knot in your spool and cast super short, and be holding in there and one eats it, you know. So, but now it's just kind of like the numbers are kind of like dropping, and I don't know if that's just because poor water management, you know, because like I said, fish like water, and when we have water, fish thrive, and that's just all species across the board, you know.
No,
So
100%. I know you talked about obviously having all the equipment for your trips and all that kind of stuff. I know you've had a pretty sweet boat that you've been in lately. What's the deal with that thing?
yeah, so the new boat, it's a sweet rig. It's a drift boat, made by Pavati, and it's super comfortable. I'm able to move seats around. It has a pizza oven, so I can cook a pizza in there, or just warm up breakfast burritos, and especially on those cold mornings when we have to get on the water super early. I turn on that heater and warm my customers up, and we can throw breakfast burritos in the little oven there. Pizza is kind of, I've done it twice, cook pizzas in there in the middle of the day, but, honestly, in the middle of the day, sometimes that heater gets almost too hot. So it's like, doesn't really, it works, but, it's kind of hot too. I mean, obviously we can scoot the seats back to kind of get away from the heat. So, but ended up getting a barbecue for it as well. So I'm able to, kind of contain the heat so it's not spread uh, it's not getting too hot. So, but yeah, the boat's super nice, super stable, the most stable drift boat I've ever been in. These drift boats go in super shallow water, and so they have to be super light. And once you get lightness in a boat, they kind of lose stability. So you lean to one side, the whole boat wants to lean. This boat it's wide and it's very stable. I absolutely love it. It has a little 9.9 kicker on it, so I'm able to kind of motor up and down the river, where I need to be. But I'm mostly on the sticks. What I mean sticks is I'm behind the oars and I'm rowing. Is the main thing I'm doing. Trying to keep the boat in the right position, being stealthy and kind of slowly going up in some of these areas, especially for stripers. These big stripers, they don't get big for being dumb. So the same thing with the salmon. When they have low water, you got to think when they're on the ocean. How deep are those fish? They have endless amount of water just to swim in. Like it's just they can be in 150 feet or 300 foot of water. But as soon as they hit the river, like 12 feet is usually pretty deep. So once you get your boat moving around, those fish kind of know, like, hey, there's something up. So being stealthy and being on the sticks and rowing kind of adds that stealthiness that you kind of need. But it's a beautiful boat. I absolutely love it. It's very comfortable.
What for people that want to, are you mostly just doing like 2-person trips, or how many people can you fit in the boat?
I two people is very comfortable, but I can do three. 3 people is, especially if I'm running the motor a lot, I can do three, no problem. Like when like salmon season, I'm back bouncing a lot of plugs, and so I use the motor a lot, and so I'm kind of using the current, kind of, facing my nose upriver, and I'm using the motor to kind of like slow me down a little bit. I'm just backing down really slow. And so 3 people, I can do 3 people and, for salmon. I just had a trip on Friday. I had 3 guys for shad and I can do it. 3 people is no problem, but 2 people is definitely, where it's at, where it's most comfortable.
No, for sure. So
So,
what, I know, like you said, you've been getting trips lately, you've been going out. What's kind of our little American River report? Maybe the thing that
so
everybody really wants to know about.
yeah, so the shad are the deal right now. They've kind of showed up around, at least up midsection of the American on Mother's Day is when they started showing up. But now they are throughout the whole river, and those big stripers are right behind them. There's a few in the river. Like I said, there's some that just locals that just stay in the river. There's plenty of bait, a huge food source, on the American. You have crawdads, you have sculpin, obviously you have pike minnow, obviously the shad, they're showing up. So there's fish that live there, but I think when it gets really hot, the Sacramento and the feather get really warm, and I think those fish kind of like backtrack. And when they fill the American with the cold water, I feel like they come up the American and they hang out, for the summer. And when the fall hits, I think they kind of back out. I feel they still some of those fish still stay there, but I think most of them kind of back out and go to the delta or go up another river. So yeah, that's kind of the deal.
And
what's going on right now in Shad.
what can people kind of expect as far as like how you're fishing for them and kind of that whole deal? Are you trolling for the shad or?
Yeah, so the shad, I have two techniques that I use. Either a float rig, which I have like a bobber stop where I can adjust my bobber stop up and down the line to kind of set my depth on where I want to fish. Obviously if I have a 4 foot hole, I kind of want to set my bobber stop. Obviously I have like a 3 foot leader, so I'll have it 6 inches or so up the line so it slides down to about 3.5 foot down. So the fish are usually laid up on the bottom or pretty close to the bottom. You kind of want to just keep it either right in front of them or right above them. You know, fish they like to feed up. They're not going to they're not picking up a crawdad off the bottom, so they're not going to be eating below them. So they're a filter feeder. So if you ever see them feeding, they kind of open their mouth up and kind of just filter whatever's coming down. They're in the herring family. So I don't know if that has any, they just, I don't know if that's kind of interesting, but yeah, they're in the herring family. So, but yeah, so float is one way I really like to fish for them. Like I said, I can adjust that bobber stop up and down the line, so I know, how deep. And when I start seeing fish, because a lot of times I'll just be floating down the river, I'll see a big school of them, and then I'll just motor up or I'll row up above them. I'll drop the anchor, and then we'll throw the float, so we'll kind of drift through there. And I love the float fishing. It's kind of a form of topwater. You're waiting for that bobber to drain or go down, and then you get all excited and you set the hook, and super fun. Another way, you have to be you have to kind of know how it's, when you're casting, you get the feel. And that's a huge thing that some people just don't know the feel. So that's why I kind of like the bobber, because it's visual. People can see what's going on. The Carolina rig, another way that I catch them, I'll just have a 1/4 ounce weight, a bead, swivel. That bead's just there to kind of protect the knot from it bouncing. And then I'll have like a 3 foot leader, 3.5, maybe 4 foot, 4 pound test, 6 pound test to a little like crappie grub. There's like a fly, a shad fly. And what I'll do, I'll throw it out in the current and I'll drift it down and I'll kind of hop it every once in a while. And a lot of those fish will eat it on the swing. But if you don't have that feeling with that Carolina rig, you don't really understand that feeling. It's a little harder to fish. So that's why I really like the floats, because you can cast it out there and you can just watch that float go down. And when it, go down river, and then when it finally drains, people get excited to set the hook. They know what the bite looks like, So that's a couple ways that I fish for shad.
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty cool. I kind of remember a couple summers ago, me and you met up after I was done with my pool route at the time, and I'm pretty sure that's what you had me doing, was kind of drifting one of those Carolina rigs down the river. And I remember, especially coming from a bass fishing background, there's just a lot of feedback that you're getting during those drifts with the rocks and everything. So I remember thinking, I was like, oh, this is a little overwhelming, just not having that feel that I'm used to.
Right.
Bite or whatnot.
Yeah, because sometimes, when you hit a rock, oh, was that a bite? Like you're not too sure, so that's where, same thing with the flow. You could be drifting through there, the bottom could come up, and your bait just gets caught on the bottom and it pulls your bobber down, with the current pushing down river. So, but the thing when you have the Carolina rig is you could be hitting bottom at any time. So sometimes it feels like a bite, and when it is just the bottom. So, and on top of that, like I've caught plenty of steelhead doing the same thing, fishing for shad, and all of a sudden you hook a steelhead and it just gets airborne. You're like, oh, and they fight. I feel like steelhead fight, pretty hard as well. Especially if you hook a big one too on 4 pound test. You're just like, hopefully you stay in, because they're just shaking their head and jumping all over the place. So, but
yeah. What have you run into any of those big stripers yet this year? I know you talked about how you like to try and live line some of those shad. Have you tried anything like that yet, or just kind of stuff for the future?
Yeah. So yeah, I've done 2 trips this year where I've tried a lot, send the shad back. And there's a few times where it got really nervous. You can feel that fish like swimming extra hard to get away from whatever was down there, but nothing ever like smoked it. Nothing like grabbed the rod and just pulled out a bunch of line. Another way I like to fish for those fish is, I'll anchor up in a hole, and I'll get my drone. I'll send it up, and I'll just be looking on my drone to see if they're in that area. Because like I said, the river's not that deep, and so sometimes you'll see these just giant slugs of stripers just hanging out. And I'm like, all right, they're right there. I'll either swing the boat over and I'll send the live bait back to them, Unfortunately, I have not got one on film eating a live shad. I've had them come up and look at it, or I've had to put my drone away because I'm losing battery. I have to put it away, and then all of a sudden I get bit. So it's pretty cool seeing them on the drone and seeing how big some of these stripers are, and able to try to send a shad back to them.
Do you know what the American River like PB or whatever striper is out there, a record?
I think I think it could be 60 pounds or 55 pounds. I think it's 60. I think it was caught on a lamprey,
Oh, one
you
of those
know,
eel
which,
things.
which we don't have very many of those anymore. It used to be everywhere. When I used to fish for springers, back, I don't even know, I think 2000, I think 2008 was the last time, 2007, 2009 was roughly the last time I think we could fish for spring salmon. And when I used to fish for springers, you'd catch um, salmon with lamprey marks on them. You'd see the circular marks where they were attached at one point, and either during the fight or just during whenever that fish was coming upriver, they detached, and was off the fish. But you'd see all these rings that were on the fish from lamprey, which is pretty cool. I've caught little ones in the river, never seen any really big ones alive. I did find a dead one that was like roughly, I don't know, 18 to 20 inches long. It was caught up in some dead line. I was just flipping rocks one day and I found some dead line. I started pulling it in. It was just a big wad of, fishing line, and that sucker was, stuck in it. But I was very impressed how big it was. I guess last year in March, I was steelhead fishing, and I saw this osprey come down and, grab, I thought it was a fish at the time, go down and grab this fish, and it came over and flew over us. And I'm like, oh man, that's a lamprey. Super cool. You see it all twisting and knotting up, trying to get out of the talons of this osprey. And I'm like, man, that's super cool. I've never seen one alive, like in the water swimming, So it was kind of so cool to see that osprey that just caught one. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, those things are pretty freaky looking from what I remember seeing on the internet. I
oh
definitely don't
yeah,
think I'd want one of those stuck to my leg or something.
no, definitely not. All their teeth and yeah, no, thank you. But it's just I just want to see one. Because then my dad and some of his friends have always told me they used to just go down there and they're just clung, they're just hanging onto the rocks. You just be able to just to grab them. Which actually there was a post recently on Facebook. There was I think an American River Facebook page. I don't know exactly what it was called, but there was a guy that took some pictures of all these. There's like 6 of them that they were spawning in the rocks. Because they actually come up from the ocean. And they spawn in the rivers just like the salmon and steelhead do. Which is kind of cool. But yeah, there was a group of them that was, spawning in the rocks, and I thought I've never seen that. It was just, I saw that post on Facebook, and I thought it was super cool.
No, that is cool. I know in the past, especially when you were in the bass fishing tournament scene a lot more, you had a lot of people kind of supporting you and different sponsors. Are you still affiliated with anyone, or are you kind of just running your own deal lately?
I have pretty much, kind of one sponsor I've been, sticking with is, P-Line, P-Line and Beckman Nets. So, I use a lot, P-Line is my main, line that I use. But that's kind of it. I've kind of been doing my own thing. Especially since I haven't really been doing YouTube, I have no way to really promote except on my social media platform, which, YouTube was a huge way to promote products, but, I'm not really wanting to promote a whole lot. I just want to go fishing, and, I'm thankful that, P-Line was, had my back and was able to support me, or support some of my tackle and my line and stuff. So, that was probably the only one that I can think of as, sponsor. Um, and then I've stayed in contact with a few other guys, like Wicked Weights. He's over in New York, upstate New York. Jim, is his name, and we talk to everyone. We talk every once in a while. I call him and see how he's doing and see how the smallmouth fishing is. And of course, it's always good when he's able to get out. He fishes like Lake Ontario and some of the like Champlain and some of the other, great fisheries that they have back there. So
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I mean, for the people that are listening to the podcast right now and they like what they hear, what's the best way to get in contact with you to book a trip?
Yeah, so the best way is either my social media platforms like Instagram or Facebook, or if you have my number, I can always, I guess, YouTube, here it goes. Here's my phone number. 916-410-4990 is my phone number. You can always shoot me a text or give me a call. I do work full time. Guiding is my side gig, so I do have a full time job. So if you call me, I don't answer, just leave me a message and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Um, so, but yeah, I work over at Ferguson Plumbing. So not over at Fisherman's anymore. I still see people. They still talk to people. They're, oh, you're still over at Fisherman's, right? And I'm like, no, not over there anymore. Just moved on. Now I'm over at Ferguson Plumbing. So, but no, Fisherman's was great. I got to build some of my clientele there. Obviously, people come in to fish. Obviously I fish a lot, or try to fish a lot. And so I hand out my business cards and whatnot. So it was a good place for me to build my, I guess, brand and build my I don't know about career at guiding, because I definitely think it's very hard to make it a career, and especially in California when things are so expensive. So it's just kind of a way to make some extra money, and pay for little man and daycare, because daycare is crazy expensive. but but yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on and giving us all an update on kind of what's to come on the American, and I think hopefully some people can get out with you soon enough. I know that I got to try and plan a trip my own. I want to try and catch some shad soon, hopefully. But
Yeah, I mean, June is the time. By July it's kind of done. You still have some lingering fish, kind of around, but they're kind of already spawned out. They don't fight as hard. So if you want to get out, it has to be in the next month or so. So, and then like I said, the stripers will be there all the way till October. But steelhead too. Steelhead's good. I've caught them, all year round. But the springtime I feel like you do definitely get a little bit bigger fish. I guess what I'm trying to say, you have two different strains of fish. Like you have a Central Valley fish that are pretty short and stocky, and then you have an Eel River strain of steelhead that come obviously from some coastal rivers like the Eel River. So that what I understand, they planted them here, they brought them here in the 70s, and it's kind of just taken off. So that's why the American is so special in the Central Valley. It has these big, wild, or not wild, but big steelhead. I mean, I'm sure some of them are wild, but the average fish is like 6 to 8.5 pounds. With them I think our record is like 25. Or 22, something like that. Just that's a big steel. It's a big ocean run rainbow. Who knows
yeah,
what they
almost a
are?
salmon at that point.
Yeah, yeah. Which my personal best on the Americans is 18 pounds. So, which is absolute a freak. But we get a couple a year that are in that 10-pound range. But with the high water that we've had the last couple of years, I'm looking forward to the future. I think it's going to be really good. This is our third year with good water. So, salmon, I don't know if you know how salmon's life cycle works, but every, 2 to 5 years, they kind of, enter the river. Nowadays it's really every 2 to 3 years. So 3 years, we've had some good water. So, I'm excited for, honestly, next year. I think next year is going to be really, really good for salmon. So, and steelhead.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on. I know a lot of people are going to be excited to hear this, and hopefully we'll hear from you again soon.
Yeah, yeah. Hopefully, I didn't sound like I was complaining about all the salmon and whatnot. I love to fish for them and whatnot. I don't want to throw that vibe out there of me kind of complaining. I want to fish for them. Everyone wants to fish for them. I just it's just water management. Obviously fish need water and to survive. And when we have low water, it's harder for them to survive. So, didn't want to come across that way of me complaining about California, which a lot of people do. A lot of people are moving out of the state because of how the state's managed. I just living my life, man. I just want to go fishing and not have to worry about politics or anything like that. It's kind of hard to do nowadays. I feel like the older I get, the more involved I want to be with that. But I feel like the more I get involved, the more saltier I get. So, and I don't want to be salty at all. So.
No, I totally get that. Little jaded as they say, right? But
Yeah.
hey, we were wrapping it up with Fisherman Wilson, and if you guys want to get a trip with him, like I said, he's got his phone number in there. I'll put a little link in the description as well for any of his information, his Instagram and social media. And we will talk to you again, Austin. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.